I am Meredith Hoggett, Montgomery County's Agriculture and Natural Resources Extension Agent. I am for the soil because I am for sustainability. Sustainability of the soil, farming families, and local foods.
Welcome once again to another episode of For the Soil, a Conversation. I'm your host, Jeff Ishii, and I am taking the week off again this week. Your co-host, Mary Sketch Bryant, and Dr. Eric Bendfeldt will be conducting the podcast this week with returning guest, Bill Patterson.
Well, welcome again to another episode of For the Soil, a Conversation. We're excited to have Bill Patterson back for part two. If you missed part one, would encourage you to go check that out. Bill Patterson is a grazing specialist with USDA-NRCS and is based out of their Harrisonburg office and has decades of experience. So I'm excited to reap more of your knowledge, Bill.
Thank you.
To start things off, I know we talked last episode a fair amount about grazing, energizing with diversity within grazing systems and the importance of flexibility. But I know also that you have a very vibrant home garden. And I know we have a lot of listeners who are very interested in soil health in that context. Would love to just hear a little bit about what you grow, how much land you grow on and what that looks like.
Well, that's sort of the sad part of the story. I'm 72 now, and we don't do near the amount of canning and freezing and putting up that we used to. So my garden is not near what it used to be, but I love to talk about it and I love to experiment. As far as vegetables that I grow these days, I grow cucumbers, I grow hot peppers, and I grow tomatoes. And the only thing I really care about in the garden today is tomatoes. But the deer population has gotten so bad in my neighborhood that it's getting harder and harder to fend them off. But I'm still trying. But over the years, there's virtually no vegetable that I haven't grown. I'm a firm believer in no-till. I don't own a tiller. I owned a tiller for about 2 years when my father-in-law died, and I ended up with his tiller, but I ended up giving it away. You don't need to work your soil. I had the best compliment that a gardener can have from Richard Fitzgerald, who I consider a mentor. Richard told me last year when I soil sampled my garden that it was the best soil sample he'd ever seen. And he said, "Did you get this out of your compost pile?" And I said, "No, I got it out of the garden." So I took that as the ultimate compliment. Rotation, rotation, rotation. Never plant the same thing in the same place within 2 or 3 years. Don't till, mulch, use compost. My wife would tell you that I get a whole lot more excited about my compost pile than I do the garden. And that's probably true. I sort of look at my garden as an experiment station. The stuff that we talk about here at work, whether it's agronomy or forage or whatever, I try to copy in my 100 square foot beds at home on a small scale, just to test stuff, just to see how it works and what I like better, that kind of thing. So it is somewhat of an experiment station.
And Bill, why exactly would you not use a rototiller?
Because you don't want to break up those soil particles. You want it, if you do a good job with mulch and compost and rotation, the critters in the soil are going to do any kind of tillage you need. So the only tillage I do is just wherever I make a indention to plant something. You don't need to go in and plow 4 acres to plant tomatoes or whatever. You just need that little spot where you actually plant the plant to do the work. And you'll see it real quickly. If you start doing that, get rid of that tiller, you're going to not be destroying all that carbon. You're going to things are going to only get better.
One of the principles we talk about is maximize living roots. How do you do that in your home garden year round?
Pretty much, if something comes off of a bed, something goes back on, and hopefully it's already gone on before the other crop comes off. Now that doesn't always work with me anymore like it used to, but if you can already have a cover crop planted or the next crop in the rotation planted before you take the first crop off, you're that much further ahead. Also, you need to use cover crops over the winter and during the summer. If you've got a lull during, know that you're going to have something bare for a month, plant buckwheat or plant oats or something that'll come on quickly, have something growing, and it's going to improve the soil.
And Bill, what is your perspective? I know with some gardens, the people still tend to like to leave them fallow during the winter time. What is your perspective?
My perspective is you need something growing, and in that you plowed it in November and you let it sit there over winter. So, like my granddaddy would have said, let it mellow, break down. Well, that's fine and it's nice and workable, but just think of the carbon that you've lost. And it takes a long time to build that back up. So even if you don't plant something, at least keep it covered. Put your leaves on it, put grass clippings, whatever you got, put it on it so that something's going on there.
And Bill, you said your garden is your experiment station. What has something surprised you in recent years that you've learned that you didn't think would work or that didn't work that you thought would work?
I've done a lot of work in the last several years with Phacelia, which is a forb. It's originally from out west in California. It grows well here. And I have several neighbors that are in the honey business. They have honeybees. And supposedly Phacelia was one of the best honey plants around. So I did a bunch of experimenting with it. And the first couple years, they used that stuff like crazy. I mean, they were just all over it. You could hear it 100 feet away. You could hear them buzzing. But in the last couple years, they haven't used it at all. So that's something that I find very interesting, and I haven't figured it out yet. But that's something that has jumped out at me.
And Bill, can you speak to how you manage both your winter cover crop and your summer cover crop?
I'll manage them. I try to get my winter cover crops in as early as I can, especially if I'm going to plant something like crimson clover or daikon radishes, that kind of thing, because if you don't get them in pretty early, it's not much use planting them. And the later in the season you go, the closer to a pure small grain rye crop out. Then in the spring, it depends on what's coming off when, but if something's coming off pretty early, I'll plant stuff like turnips. I'll plant a lot. I love oats, spring oats, and I'll use spring oats in the summer. And I love buckwheat in the heat of the summer, because you can get buckwheat growing in a few days. And even if it only gets 6 inches tall, it's still something growing and it's helping the soil. A lot of people say, oh, well, you need a tiller to get rid of those weeds. I don't necessarily see weeds as that big of a problem. As long as you're mulching and as long as you're taking care of the plants that you plant, I don't care if I have some weeds growing.
Now, Bill, are you just cutting the cover crops? What are you doing to sort of reduce the competition that they might have with your tomatoes or cucumbers?
Well, typically I roll my cover crops. I just have a 4x4 post that I have a rope tied onto, and I just walk through the bed, mash it down. Now, one thing is real important on some of the small grains, especially, you have to make sure that it is convinced it's gone to seed before you do this. because if you don't, it's going to stand right back up. So also I'll mash it down and then I'll put mulch on top of it. That helps. So you have to keep it from competing with what it is you're planting. Also, another thing that I can't emphasize too much is cow manure. People use horse manure, they use sheep, they use whatever. I'm a firm believer in good, well-rotted cow manure is the best fertilizer you'll ever have, and especially with tomatoes. You can tell I'm prejudiced.
And Bill, early on, you mentioned Richard Fitzgerald and his comment around the soil test. What should gardeners be looking for in a soil test to let them know their soil's healthy, specifically around diversity?
In my opinion, they should be looking for critter activity in the soil, or how reactive it is, or how likely it is to be available. If microbial activity, you're going to have good soil, and that's sort of what I look at. The NP and K is great, but if you're mulching and if you're using compost, you're going to have the nutrients. It's just how is that stuff available to the plant? pH is important, but microbial activity is extremely important.
And Bill, through the years, the connections between soil health and plant health in your garden, how do you know the soil health has been improved through what you observe in the plant? And
well, quality is the primary thing. Does it taste good? Does it make you feel good? It's good. You can do all the testing in the world, and you can do the sugar content and all that, and that's great. But there's nothing better than biting into something that came out of the garden and you say, man, I wish I could do that every year.
And Bill, does NRCS work with landowners on a smaller scale for home gardening or smaller scale production?
I'm not sure about home gardening, but they do work with small scale. We even actually have a specialist now in Richmond that's their job, is working with small scale, like vegetable grower kind of thing, which I think is a good thing.
And Bill,
one other thing that I should mention, I get a lot of questions about lawns, about, oh man, your lawn looks so good. It looks so good. What do you do? And I tell them the best thing you can do for your lawn is get a good mower, keep the blade sharp, set it as high as it'll go, and get rid of the control. Don't fix it so you can lower the deck on that mower. And then never collect your grass clippings. You're going to have the best lawn you've ever had.
And Bill, one last question for, I would say, young people that are coming out of high school or college and are wanting to work with land and soil and natural resources. What advice would you have for them?
Find somebody in their neighborhood or up or down the road that is doing what you think you like, and go offer to help them. Let them become your mentor. And there again, you can tell the ones that are doing a good job. And usually if they're doing a good job, they like to brag about it, or they like to show, hey, yeah, this is what I'm doing. This is why I'm doing it. That works really well.
Well, again, Bill, we're very pleased to have you and sharing your experience with USDA's Natural Resource Conservation Service, both in a grazing environment and a home garden environment. So thank you so much, Bill.
You're welcome.
And that was part 2 of our conversation with Mr. Bill Patterson. He is the recipient of the Carl Lubin Soil Health and Water Quality Award presented by Virginia Tech and the Virginia Soil Health Coalition. Bill Patterson, a man with, well, this year, I believe this summer, he'll be celebrating 50 years of interest and passion for soil health. Our thanks to Mr. Bill Patterson for being a special guest on the program. We've got an extra minute or so. I would like to remind everyone of the website forthesoil.org, and that is the digit for thesoil.org. and you'll find just a lot of resources there. The 4 core principles of soil health. Number 1, keep soil covered. Number 2, minimize soil disturbance. Number 3, maximize living roots. And number 4, energize with diversity. You'll also find numerous blog entries. You'll find an archive of all of these podcasts, which we've been doing for 3 years now. Hard to believe, but that's all at the website forthesoil.org. For the Soil, a conversation is made possible with funding support from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and the Agua Fund. Other partners include the USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service, Virginia Cooperative Extension, Virginia State University, Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation, and partners of the Virginia Soil Health Coalition. Views expressed on this podcast are those of each individual guest. To download a copy of this or any other episode, visit the website forthesoil.org. And if you should have a specific question about soil health, don't hesitate to call your local extension office, your local USDA service center, or a Soil and Water Conservation District office. Music used during today's program was provided courtesy of the Flip Charts, all rights reserved. For the Soil, a conversation is produced by On the Farm Radio in collaboration with Virginia Tech. I'm your host, Jeff Ishii.